One of the best-known Christian hymns is Amazing Grace. Did you know that the man who wrote it before he got saved was a slave trader? John Newton wrote Amazing Grace, 1772. Growing up, his parents were religious but not devout. He got a job at sea working on ships. And when he was at sea, his life, as his song says, was filled with dangers, toils, and snares. There were many times he almost died but didn't. It was like God just had providentially his hand upon him. Eventually, even though he refused to turn to God, he met the Lord, but he joined the British Navy. He was such a bad soldier, they kicked him out. He got on a ship that was transporting slaves and got into the slave trading business. Down in Sierra Leone, he caught malaria, and he was in prison. He was so poor. And the man and the woman that enslaved him literally abused him physically and every other way. I won't go into it, it's so perverted. And that's where he talked about saved a wretch like me. That's where his wretchedness came from. Finally got healed of malaria, broke out of there, got on another ship, and while it was sailing, it's like God was after him. A typhoon came through, and he didn't know if he'd make it, and it was during that night he was reading a book by Thomas à Kempis, Imitation of Christ. And while the water was coming all around him and he was floating on that boat thinking he was going to die, he gave his heart to Jesus Christ. Came back to England, got out of the slave trading business, and in a little bitty church, in England, I've been to that church, they asked him to be their pastor. And he agreed. And he immediately started preaching, writing songs. In 1772, he wrote Amazing Grace. 60 years later, they put that poem to music in America, and he became one of the strongest advocates of anti-slavery in all of England. He said, we don't need to work people and not pay them. That is wrong. Nobody wants to live like that. He wrote a pamphlet called Thoughts Upon the African Slave Trade. He came upon a friend there in Olney, William Cowper, also pro-abolitionist songwriter. Have you ever heard the song, by the way, there is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunge beneath that flood, lose all their guilty stains? Cowper wrote that, wrote it in Olney. A little bitty town. Isn't that how God works? These two giants were in this little bitty town. And then they had an encounter with William Wilberforce, who was in Parliament, and they said, you're the one that God wants to stop slavery in England. In 1789, Newton persuaded Parliament member William Wilberforce to issue a bill to end slavery in England. 15 years later, 1804, the bill passed the House of Commons. 3 years later, 1807, it passed the House of Lords, and King George III declared slavery illegal in England, all because a man got right with God and said, we need to pay people what we owe them. We need to pay people what we owe them. And no doubt, James' verse here in chapter 5, verse 4, behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields and which has been withheld of you cries against you. No doubt, scriptures like that touched his heart. When you don't pay people what you owe them, you treat them like a slave. I want to repeat that. When you don't pay your debts, when you don't pay people that you owe, you treat them like a slave. And God will discipline you for it. God doesn't want you, he doesn't want his children to be stingy and selfish. He doesn't want you to rip people off. If you owe somebody, pay them. Don't find some fancy lawyer in a legal loophole to get out of it. If you owe somebody, man up, woman up, and pay it. I don't care what the law says. Pay it. Pay it. Pay what you owe. If you don't pay your debts, God will punish you. Rotting riches earn your denunciation. Well, rotting riches, letting your riches just rot in your little savings account instead of helping people. Not saying you don't have any savings account, but I'm saying don't get greedy about it. When God prompts you to give, you better do it.